Welcome to Tabletop Tommies, episode 18. I'm Jonny.
Je suis Philippe.
On call. And today we're looking at the armies of Free France, found in the Western Desert and Battle of the Bulge book. They are quite different to the French you'll find in the armies of France and allies. And so we thought they're worth considering in their own right. So today we're going to find out what's good about them, how they differ, and why Phil won't stop talking French. But first, if you are planning to come to the English Open, pick up your ticket now while they're still available.
We're also delighted to announce that we now have a Patreon, which is available at patreon.com/Tabletop Tommies. We've been absolutely blown away by the support received so far, and this is another opportunity for you, the listeners, to support us to enable us to continue to produce great content on a weekly basis.
So where would you find the Free French, Phil?
So you can find the Free French in both the Western Desert and the Battle of the Bulge book. The Western Desert obviously represents North Africa and mid-war. And then the late war Free French are in Battle of the Bulge. So we'll start with the Western Desert. Now, technically, this is a theatre selector. However, I have seen events and tournaments allow it as a generic platoon option, but only using the units from this book. You can't mix and match from the Allies of France, for example.
Oh, that's interesting.
So in terms of where we are in history, this is 1942, summer 1942. So the theatre selector is based around the fortress of Bir Hakeim, and there were just over 3,500 Frenchmen holding out against 37,000 German and Italian troops. So 10-to-1 ratio there. And this was a fortress in North Africa. Now, at this period of the war, the French were being supported and supplied by the British. So what you find in this particular selector is some of the French units we've seen in the Allies of France, also with some of the mid-war British equipment options. First thing to note is the Army Special Rules. They are different to the armies of France and the Allies. So none of the rules apply from the France and the Allies. Instead, they get the following. First one they get, which is incredibly good, is the rule called Fight in French. And what this allows is for all units may re-roll unsuccessful morale checks and the second result stands.
That's absolutely belter.
Yeah.
I wish I had that national characteristic.
Mm-hmm. So it's like the Soviet special rule. It's absolutely brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is because these essentially were experienced troops. So they were French troops who had escaped from France at the end of the Battle of France, in addition to the colonial forces which were in Africa. You're not allowed to take any inexperienced troops of any kind in this selector.
Just to clarify on that, are there any options too?
No, there aren't any with regards to the specific unit choices. It's just that when you get into a situation where you may take a unit that appears in the armies of Great Britain, for example, you can't do so at inexperienced.
Interesting, yeah. Because my thought process on that was around weapons teams, because does the word troops include both weapons teams and infantry squads?
So my reading of this is that no unit, irrespective of HQ, infantry, artillery, or vehicles, can be inexperienced.
I think that's a fair reading of it, and a fair way to play.
Okay. The next one is the forward artillery doctrine, which is very similar to the armies of France and the Allies book. However, you can only take light guns, so light howitzers or light and medium anti-tank guns.
Oh, that's a bit of a shame.
Yeah, but there is a nice little twist.
Okay.
Which we'll show later. Next one is Sous officer, and this represents how a lot of the Free French NCOs had seen action as officers in many wars. So whilst at this point in the French army they were serving as NCOs, previously they'd served as commissioned officers. What this means in game terms is that if your last officer is killed, an NCO or even a trooper will try to take command of the troops. So once per game, as soon as an officer has been removed as a casualty, the NCO of the nearest infantry squad within 12 inches of the officer which has become a casualty takes over command of the reinforced platoon. So it's automatically they take over command of that platoon. They gain the benefit of the second lieutenant, so they grant +1 to all order and morale tests to his own unit and those within 6 inches of himself. He remains with the original squad. The officer is still removed as a casualty as normal, so you lose the dice if that officer team has been killed, or if it's the model that's been killed, the officer comes out of that unit, that team. And the newly promoted officer can take the You Men Snap 2 action as well.
That's brilliant. To be honest, that's how I'd like my officers to run generally in a bigger squad. And so you could actually send your officer up in front of the men as a bit of bait. And then if they do take the bait and shoot your officer, not a problem. The guy behind him's going to take over.
Absolutely, yeah. The last army special rule is that all Free French units have the Desert Fighters trait, which is obviously very specific to the scenarios that are in the Western Desert book.
I tell you what I like about your Sioux officer rule, actually. I like the fact that you don't have to roll for that ability.
Yes, it's automatically granted, providing you're within 12 inches of the officer that's been taken casualty.
Yeah, which is really nice compared to usually when that rule exists elsewhere for other stuff, they make you roll for it, and then every now and then it doesn't go off. So that's really nice that it's an auto one. Cool. You can't build this as a generic platoon, you said, so you have to use one of the selectors?
No, so there is only one selector. So there is one Free French Western Desert selector, and that's the only one that you can take. Technically, it is a theatre selector. However, I have seen it being allowed in generic platoon events as a alternative French generic platoon, effectively.
Yeah, and how does it differ from the generic?
So, interestingly, even though it's a theatre selector, you are limited to only 5 infantry squads, whereas most theatre selectors allow you to have 0 to 4 for the optional squads. This only allows you to have 0 to 3. So, in that sense, it's a bit more like a generic platoon. You get your usual, 1 lieutenant, 2 infantry squads, and then your options are your captain or major, your medical officer, things like your chaplain and your intelligence officer would apply as well. 0 to 3 infantry squads, 0 to 1 machine gun, 0 to 1 mortar, 0 to 1 anti-tank rifle team, 0 to 1 marksman, so not a sniper but a marksman, and we'll look at that in a minute. 0 to 1 artillery, and that is limited to all your light howitzers and your light or medium guns. 0 to 2 armoured cars, or self-propelled gun trucks, and you're going to like some of these, Johnny. You don't get a tank because they didn't have any, and you can take 0 to 1 transport vehicle or tow per infantry or artillery unit.
So it sounds like to me it is basically a generic platoon, but you swap your tank option for a second armoured car, effectively.
Yes, yeah, and you don't get a flamethrower, for example. There is no engineer section either.
Interesting.
So in terms of the options you've got for the HQ unit, it's the same as normal. It's a second lieutenant, 50 points regular, 65 points vet. So no difference there at all. Likewise with the medic. With the forward observer, you can't take an air observer. You can only take artillery observers because to quote the book, the sky belonged to the Germans. But yeah, nothing going on there of interest in terms of the HQ options. In terms of your infantry squads, now you can choose any of these as your 2 compulsory, and you can choose any combination of these as your 0 to 3. So you're not limited to choosing particular units in your compulsory choices. So you've got your Foreign Legion, which are veterans, so 14 points. They are normal vets with stubborn. The slight difference from the Armies of French version is that you have your NCO can have an SMG, and up to 2 soldiers can have additional SMGs, and you can add an additional soldier with a pistol. So it is possible to build your 5-man core squad. You can add a 6-man with a pistol, and then you can have another 3 SMGs. So you can have a 6-man squad with 4 assault weapons and therefore 4 tough fighters, and they are veteran and stubborn.
Yeah, that'd be really good. That's certainly better than the Armies of France version.
Mm-hmm. Your Senegalese are exactly the same. So they're regulars, 11 points each, tough fighters. Mm-hmm. And you can add your light machine gun and VB launcher. Now, the Senegalese were the majority of the troops at this point. So if you're going thematic, you'd expect to see a lot of Senegalese sections backed up with some of the other ones that we're going to go through. Mm-hmm. Your North African infantry section represents your Algerians, your Moroccans, and your Tunisians. Unlike the armies of France and the Allies, these are regular rather than vet. They don't get tough fighter, but they do get the mountaineer special rule. So you're paying 11 points for a regular because it's that extra 1 point is the mountaineer rule. And for this particular wording, because it's slightly different in different campaign books, for this particular wording, you treat all rough ground as open ground.
Yeah. It does have a little bit after that as well, though, doesn't it? Which
So the players should discuss and agree before the game which terrain this rule should not apply to, such as water features and other terrain elements that obviously mountain troops would have no advantage in crossing.
yeah. I'm not a fan of that because I don't like. So for theatre play, sure, campaign games,
Mhm.
of course, like it's all very good natured, and you agree. You've decided almost before the game started how it's going to play. This is going to crop up if this was allowed generic.
Mhm.
It's going to crop up at a tournament where, because it's not specific, you have to agree beforehand. You might forget to do it, or you might have a disagreement. It would be much nicer if they just told you.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of do the say, doesn't apply to water. I wish they would have just made a list of the things that it should apply to.
So for me, the way I play this is anything which you would normally say is rough ground. So, woods and forests or ruins, for example, or fields or, craters, you treat them as open ground. So that means you can run through them 12 inches. If you're running through a wood into an assault, not only can you run 12 inches, but it wouldn't be simultaneous because you're treating it as open ground. So the reason I like this particular section, it's very good, for example, towards the end of the game, if you're loitering near an objective, or if you're close to one of the scoring zones in, say, double envelopment or sectors, you can run that 12 inches through intervening terrain, which your opponent may have forgotten that this particular unit has that option to do. So it's very good for controlling or contesting objectives at the end, or that late dash into the scoring zone in sectors, for example.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant for that. Because if you had a 6-inch wood and then the objective was 6 inches in front of that wood, or near enough, you could put this squad behind the woods. They can't be seen. And then the very last dice of the game, they just run 12 inches onto that objective.
Absolutely.
Which would be brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because actually, if they can run through a crater, they could run through a stream.
Yes, okay, but let's not worry about that.
Well, yeah, I think it should just be treat all rough ground as open ground, should just be the rule.
Yeah, it's because they're mountain troops, so they're not fussed with, rocky and broken ground, effectively. Getting their feet wet may be a bit different.
I just can't think of anything that I would rule that they can't. Because the only thing I can think of is stuff like barbed wires, but they're obstacles.
Yeah.
And I'm genuinely struggling to think of anything where I'd be like, oh, that's not mountainy.
yeah. So the next option you have are just regular infantry sections. These are 10 men. These represent the colonial troops and also the French forces that were stationed in, for example, Cyprus and Syria. They're just straightforward regulars, 10 points a man. You can take one with a pistol, you can add an SMG, you can add an LMG. To be honest, I don't know why you would take them, because the other choices are better.
It's the same as the early French, isn't it? The regular infantry sections aren't really getting a day out unless... I mean, even if you just want 5 riflemen regular, there's other options. So it's just there basically for your players who just want to represent the regular infantry, I suppose.
And then your final infantry section you can take is the Sapper Minor Squad. These are 10 points for 5 men regular, or 65 points for veteran. They are just normal, regular or veteran soldiers, other than the fact they have the engineer rule, which allows them to navigate and clear minefields in exactly the same way as pioneers can. And it's very, very situation specific, for example, to the campaign scenarios in his book.
Not particularly interesting. I think if I was just looking for 5 riflemen, I might take the sappers over the regular riflemen, just because there's more interesting modelling opportunities.
Yeah, so for me, I would only ever look at the Foreign Legion, the Senegalese, or the North Africans, because the Foreign Legion give me my vets, and I can take up to 4 with assault weapons and therefore become tough fighters.
Yep.
My Senegalese for 11 points, I can take a 12-man squad, all of whom are tough fighters, for example. And my North Africans allow me that little sneaky maneuver with regards to rough ground being treated as open ground.
Yeah, I think if I'm building this platoon, I'm going to build a full Foreign Legion platoon, and I'm going to go sort of 6 men per squad, 5 squads, with the 3 SMGs, pistol, and that's going to be my core infantry. And then, because they're great at both holding and attacking.
See, I've gone the other way and focused on the Senegalese and big 12-man squads of Senegalese to get that chunky squad, which can obviously shoot rifles on the way in. And then if you've got, let's say you lose 2 or 3 casualties, you still got 9 or 10 men charging in on an assault.
Yeah.
And then my Foreign Legion are there to take and hold ground or objectives because they're stubborn and they're going to have a scattering of pistols and SMGs. They'll be able to withhold, in theory, any assaults against them.
Yeah. I am very interested in those North Africans so that I can run through the woods.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I was a really experienced player with the Free French, I can imagine taking one squad of them for late game shenanigans would be quite powerful.
Which is exactly what I've done for the one I've built for the Welsh Open. Yeah. And then in terms of your infantry support weapons, you get a marksman rather than a sniper. So this is a lone sniper, effectively. So he's 10 points cheap, he's 40 points regular, or 50 points veteran. Because he only ever starts with one man, it's a lone marksman, you don't get that -1 penalty for losing your assistant because you never had that assistant in the first place. In the French army, there were no sniper teams. Instead, the best shot of a section was provided with a sniper rifle, performing his role alone. A good marksman can pick off unsuspecting soldiers or their officers without giving away his position.
Have they got any mortars, Phil?
So you get a light mortar team, regular or vet. You can get a medium mortar team, regular or vet. You can't take a heavy mortar. You get a machine gun team, regular or vet, and you get a boys anti-tank rifle team, regular or vet.
Perfect. Artillery-wise, you said no medium howitzers in this one.
No. So artillery-wise, you've got your light anti-tank gun, which is essentially as it is from the Armies of France book. You've got your medium anti-tank gun, again from the Armies of France book. You can have a 25mm anti-aircraft gun, again from the Armies of France book, or you can have your 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun, which is taken from the Armies of Great Britain book. Okay. The one that you should take, given the choice, is the light howitzer. So this is the Cannon to 75, and this is both a light howitzer, and for an extra 5 points, you can fire it as a light anti-tank gun with a +4 penetration. So it's essentially a British 25-pounder.
Yeah, absolutely cracking. 100%.
And you can take this obviously for free. So you can take 2 of these light howitzers, one of them is free, and then you upgrade them so that you get the dual-purpose light howitzer, light anti-tank gun.
Question, can you have a spotter?
No, you can't have a spotter. So it's not like the 25-pounder in that sense. So these are direct firing, indirect firing, line of sight only howitzers and AT guns.
Bit of a shame, but still a really good gun.
And then in terms of the armoured cars, so you can take 0 to 2 of these, and they're really interesting. So some of them are very French, some of them are very British, and some of them are, let's just see what we can throw together in the field. Okay, so the first one is the Dodge Tanak, which is 115 points regular or 138 points vet. It's a wheeled 7+ armoured carrier. It has recce. It is open-topped, and it's armed with a low-velocity light anti-tank gun, so it only has the +3 pen, with a coaxial MMG in an open turret, which is why it gets the open-topped rule, and it also has a pintle-mounted LMG. And essentially, this was a 1.5-ton Dodge truck, which they then slapped some armour on and then stuck a turret on it.
It's pretty good, to be fair. If you're going to be open-top, then you might as well have that pintle.
Yeah. It's a great-looking model. So Perry make this model. I've got one of these. It's a really nice-looking model. And it was very much a case of, right, we need to do something with what we've got. And the way they use these is they used to send them out on recon patrols from the fort. And they'd go out in pairs or threes. But yeah, that's one that I say I own the model. It's sort of probably my second choice to take.
Okay.
The other options you get is the recce carrier, which is your brain carrier essentially, with recce. So it's exactly the same as the options you get in the Armies of Great Britain. So you can take it with a forward-facing LMG. You can take it with an anti-tank rifle. You can add your pintle LMG as well. Sticking with the recce carrier theme, I love this one. You can take a 25mm carrier, which is a British Universal Carrier, and rather than having the LMG, it has a forward-facing light anti-tank gun.
Pretty good.
So it's 7+ armoured carrier, 105 points, open-topped, obviously. You can add a pintle as well. Now, I haven't found any models for this in the right scale. There is a company that makes 20mm versions, but I'm sure that with a little bit of kit bashing, you could model this quite easily.
That one, you can add a pintle.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
So you for 110 points, so 105 regular, 5 points for the Pintle. What you can have then is a forward-facing light anti-tank gun with a Pintle LMG, open-topped with the turn on a spot rule because it's a universal carrier.
I don't know why you wouldn't take the Pintle for 5 points. Absolute bargain.
Yeah, if you're going to take that, you would. And bearing in mind, you can take 0 to 2 armor cars, and you should take 2 armor cars as well. The other two to flag up, there's an anti-aircraft truck, which I quite like. Effectively, it's just a soft skin vehicle with a AA for 60 points.
Bit steep.
What you can do, though, is upgrade it to a quad-mounted AA for plus 40 points. So for 100 points, you're getting a 6+ soft skin, 4 HMG, 360 arc of fire truck.
I can see a use for him. 12 plus 1 pen shots. It would be a lot of fun to put in the outflank, rush in 12 inches behind a tank, and then just light up the back of the tank with the heavy machine guns.
The other option, you might like this one, Johnny, is the Dervish light anti-tank Partie. So this is a 25mm light anti-tank gun on an open platform with 360 arc of fire for 65 points regular, 6+ soft skin.
Yeah, it's my M6 Dodge gun carrier, isn't it? Basically, but better.
Yeah.
Because my M6 can't shoot forwards, so I always have to do a drive-by. This is the same points, but I don't have to do a drive-by anymore. I can shoot you in the front arc as well.
Yeah.
So brilliant, yeah. Get me one of them, please.
Or, my favourite is the Calendar 75 Partie. So this is essentially a Ford or a Chevrolet truck. And what they did was they took their light howitzers, the Calendar 75s, and they shoved them in the back of the truck.
Yep.
So for 65 points regular, you get a rear-facing light howitzer on a 6+ soft skin vehicle. And then for an additional 5 points, you upgrade it so it becomes a light AT gun as well as a light howitzer.
Okay, I've changed my mind. I'll have 2 of them instead, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I wish you could take that in the early war French, because that is such a good little anti-tank truck, because once you've dealt with the armour, you can then start popping the light howitzer troops.
Yeah, I wish you could take it as well, because I've kit bashed this. You can't buy this easily, so I've had to source a couple of trucks and then get the artillery from Perry, and then do a little bit of kit bashing, stick the artillery in the back of the truck. Perry do a version of this, but it's not quite what I was looking for.
It was jerry-rigged, wasn't it, in the field? So
yeah,
I presume it didn't get carried into any later engagements either, did it?
Not at all. No, this was very much a case of, we've got a load of trucks and we've got a load of light howitzers that can fire at AT. We need to deal with the armour. Let's just shove these howitzers in the back of a flatbed truck.
Brilliant. It is very good.
And then in terms of your transports, because it's British supported, you get a Bren carrier, you get a 3-ton truck, you get a 15 CWT truck, you get a 30 CWT truck, you get a Jeep, and you get a quad tractor.
Okay. Nothing hugely noteworthy. I suppose the Brent carrier is quite good fun.
Yeah.
And the rest of them are fairly standard, aren't they?
Now, if you're going to build this historically, so the French broke out of the siege with the foreign legions in Bren carriers.
Nice.
So going back to your point about if you were going to run this army, you take your 5-man foreign legion squads, tool them up with pistols and SMGs. You then shove them in a load of Bren carriers, and then you take some of the Senegalese or the North African infantry sections and stick in some light howitzers.
It's a shame, actually, because I can't take my pistol man with me if I do that, because
no, you can't.
It makes it a 6-man squad, and the Bren, can you not just ride on the grill? Just put him up front.
So I think on paper it doesn't look brilliant, because you haven't got anything heavy in terms of heavy howitzers and bigger guns. You don't get a tank, for example. Your infantry sections are quite limited in your choices. However, when you combine it with, for example, the Fighting French special rule, where you re-roll all unsuccessful morale checks, you also combine it with the fact that you do get a free artillery piece. You're going to take the Calendar 75 with the upgrade to turn it into effectively a French 25-pounder. And you also get 2 armoured cars, both of which, if you wanted to, could also have those 2 light howitzers with the AT upgrades. You can build a force whereby you've got 4 light howitzers, 2 static and 2 mobile. You can have big squads of regular tough fighters in the Senegalese. You can have smaller squads of SMG pistol wielding stubborn foreign legions. You've got your standard support options in terms of your mortar, anti-tank rifle, your marksman, and so on. And when I was building my army for the Welsh Open, which is 1,000 points, I actually had a load of points left over by the time I started to kit out kind of everything I wanted, because everything's really cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is definitely worth looking at. It's very, very flavoursome. In terms of the modelling opportunities, there are some great choices out there. So Perry make all of the metal, French Foreign Legion, also some Senegalese artillery pieces, the infantry squads, the HQ, the mortar, the MMG, that kind of thing. They do some of the vehicles, so the Dodge Tanak Perry make as well. They scale pretty well with War Games Atlantic's early war French plastic box, and you can make the Senegalese out of that. And then Artisan make the North African, so they make the Goumier, which is what your North African infantry section will be. So there's some real, interesting choices to make interesting choices you get in terms of what models you get to choose, and they're very colourful, because you've got your red hats, from your Senegalese, you've got your white kepis for your Foreign Legion, your Moroccans were in traditional striped robes, for example. So they visually look really good on the table.
Nice. What I like about this is you can't play the Free French generically, but actually what they've done really well, I think, is they've built a theatre selector that is nicely balanced. So it's not underpowered or overpowered. You've got clear advantages, like the re-rolling morale checks and getting the second armoured car. But equally, you've got clear disadvantages, like you don't get to take any tanks and you don't get any high explosives bigger than 2 inches. So I actually think they've done a really good job here of balancing sort of the advantages against the disadvantages. And I think this is a really nice list.
It was written by your favourite bolt action author, who wrote Fortress Budapest.
Was it?
It's Brian Cook, yeah, who wrote the selector, yeah.
Interesting. I'm glad you told me after I said that. Otherwise, it's just going to sound like a bit of a fangirl.
He wrote the original PDF, which it was based on.
So that's our Western Desert French then. How does that compare to the Battle of the Bulge French?
So Battle of the Bulge allows you to take a late war Free French force. So this is a theatre selector. It's found on page 87 of the Battle of the Bulge book, and it is used to represent all of the new late war Free French units included in the Bulge book, rather than specifically being just about winter 1944-45. So it's fairly standard as a platoon. It's your compulsory officer, 2 compulsory infantry squads, of which there are 4 you can choose from. You then get your normal selection of an additional officer, medic, forward observer, chaplain, and so on. Because it's a theatre selector rather than a generic platoon, you get 0 to 4 infantry squads, and this gives you the opportunity to take at least one of all of the different units which are in the Battle of the Bulge book, so more options than the 2 compulsory ones. You then get on top of that your MMG, your mortar, bazooka, sniper, flamethrower, artillery, 0 to 1 armoured car, 0 to 1 armoured vehicle, and then your transports and tows.
So in summary, the only difference to the generic platoon is 1 extra troop choice, basically.
Yes, but the units you can take are specifically found within the Battle of the Bulge book, rather than those being available in the episode we previously talked about with regards to early war and generic platoon units for French.
Perfect. Cool. So what national characteristics do they get then?
So with the Battle of the Bulge one, you ignore everything that came from the Battle of France, also from the armies of France, and instead you get 3. So the first one is Sacred Ground, and this represents how the Frenchmen are fighting for their own homeland against the very invaders which pushed them out in 1940. What this means is that any regular or veteran infantry unit may be stubborn for +1 point per model.
That's very good in a competitive scene where you see a lot of flamethrowers.
Second one is La Resistance. What this means is that you may include a free 10-man FFI, which is the Forces of the French Interior squad, if you include 2 or more FFI squads of any size. So FFI essentially are resistance partisan units. You can take 2 5-man squads of these, and then you get a free 10-man squad.
That's really good, because normally the free squad is as big as the smallest squad that you paid for. That's really good. What about the upgrades and stuff?
So you have to pay for the upgrades.
Okay.
Yeah. Obviously, if it's a single platoon event and you're taking 2 of your 5 slots for your little 5-man FFI squads, you just need to bear that in mind because you're restricting the number of other squads you can take because you've only got 5 in total.
Yeah, it'll be interesting once we get to that entry. That'll probably give me a better insight as to whether that's a really bad thing or if it's not that bad.
And the last one you may like as well. It's slightly American in its feel.
Mm-hmm.
And this is local area knowledge. So because the French were fighting back on French soil initially and then pushing through into Belgium and so on, what this means in game terms is that a late war Free French force does not suffer the -1 penalty for attempting to bring vehicles onto the table.
I do like that. I don't understand why the troops don't know where they are if the vehicles do, though. I wonder if there's something in this list that would cause an imbalance if the troops could outflank or reserve without the -1.
Wait and see.
Exciting.
Okay.
You've piqued my interest.
So in terms of your choices, your HQ is as standard. So your officer is either taken from the armies of France and the Allies or from the armies of the United States. They're essentially the same thing. Your medic is the same, either from France and the Allies or the United States. Your forward observer is the same. Your intelligence officer is as normal, likewise your chaplain as well. So no big surprises or no big changes there in terms of your HQ units.
You're saying from the US as well. They're US supported at this point.
So at this point of the war, it is a French army. So it's not like in Italy where they were French troops fighting under US command.
Mm-hmm.
They are a standalone army. So the first Free French army, equipped by the US.
Brilliant. That was my key question there because I'm thinking modelling opportunities. What sort of kit? Are we looking at Frenchman and US kit then?
So the way I would model this is if I was going to do that, I'd be looking at your US infantry plastics from Warlord Games. And then I'd be, depending on what I'm choosing, if I'm taking Foreign Legion, for example, I might put kepis on them. You can get the kepis. If you have the War Games Atlantic French infantry box set, there's plenty of heads with kepis there. Gripping Beast also make suitably scaled kepis, for example. If I wanted to represent maybe some of the Senegalese or the Moroccan Goumiers, I might look at the American winter Warlord Games models because they got the great coats, Battle of the Bulge, that sort of thing. All of that will be appropriate. Obviously, the FFI squad are Resistance, Partisans, War Games Atlantic box set would be absolutely great there. You do get French SAS, and I'd be using the Warlord Games British Para models for that. So there's quite a lot of interesting kit bashing you can do. It's either going to be essentially US equipment with French heads. You can even put some of the Adrian helmets on it because they were still using them. It wasn't just the US issued helmets; they were also using some of the old French ones.
Brilliant. So that's your HQ covered. What's in the infantry sections then? Anything exciting?
There's a few exciting ones yet. So you've got your normal late war regular infantry squad, which is 10 points a man, 60 points for 6 men regular. You can add a BAR or you can add a light machine gun. You can take an SMG. So just fairly standard, late war regular soldiers kit out, essentially. But you can take a BAR, which is interesting because obviously it's US supplied.
And a better choice than the LMG, I would say.
Yeah. You can take a late war inexperienced infantry squad, which is exactly the same. It just costs you 7 points per man rather than 10.
Cool.
You can take your FFI squad. So we mentioned these already. So these are 7 points a man, 35 points for 5 men, inexperienced, armed with rifles. You can take up to 3 SMGs.
Mm-hmm.
You can also take a LMG for the normal 20 points. And FFI units are green.
Cool. I think they're worth taking. If you're getting the 10-man squad free and you've got the infantry slots open, probably best in a dual platoon this, but if you take 2 35 points units just to sit in the back field, you get your 10-man squad, put the 3 SMGs on them, and then rush it up the table, wait until you take a wound, and it goes regular. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
What I like about this unit as well is that there's a little clause added underneath the entry. You can take this FFI unit as an additional infantry squad or section in both the Normandy and Operation Cobra theatre selectors from the armies of the US, and also the Normandy selector from the armies of Great Britain.
So if you are limited to single platoon, then here's a sneaky way to get one extra infantry section in.
So last year at the Welsh Open, I took a British platoon using the Normandy selector, and I based it on Pegasus Bridge. So I had some Paras, and I also had Lord Lovett and his commandos. And I snuck in a 10-man FFI squad as well, because I was just, in my alternative history, I was imagining that Lord Lovett picked up some French resistance fighters on his way to Pegasus Bridge. And I effectively, modelled it with my Paras, were already there. Commandos were coming in. I had a Centaur as well. And then the FFI squad were supporting.
Yeah, they hear all the commotion. They go to investigate. Makes sense.
Oui, oui, ooh la la.
Qu'est-ce que c'est and all that.
Qu'est-ce que c'est indeed. Anyway, back to the late war French. You can take Moroccan Goumiers. These are, interestingly, so a third version of them, and they're different from what we've seen previously. They are 6-man units for 84 points veteran. So they're 14 points each. The reason why they're 14 points each is that they are tough fighters. So at this stage, they're exactly the same as the Armies of France version. You can add up to 3 SMGs. You can add an LMG. You can add anti-tank grenades. But what you can also do is make them mountain troops for +1 point per man. So you can make a little 6-man veteran squad with mountain troops so they can run through rough ground and give them 3 SMGs. So you've now got tough fighting, SMG armed, veteran. We don't care about rough ground troops.
To be honest, I'm not going to give them the SMGs, I think, because they're already tough fighters. And so I think I'd just take them as big squads, just for close quarters, basically.
Yeah.
8-man squads, tough fighters will probably do the job with the Mountaineers rule.
Next one you got is the late war Tirailleurs squads. So interestingly, these can be inexperienced. So previously we've only seen them as regular or veteran. They're the standard price, 710.13. For regular or veterans, you can make them tough fighters for +1 point per man. And also for regular or vets, you can make them mountain troops for +1 point per man. So you can take regular tough fighter mountain troops.
Yeah.
Make it a big enough squad. Make it a 12-man squad. It's pretty chunky.
Yeah, I think I'm going to, if they're tough fighters, I'm going to go for the veterans. Just for the close quarters. It makes quite a bit of difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In which case, I don't see much difference between those two entries, really. If my plan for both of them is just to take 8-man squad, veteran, tough fighters, mountain troops.
You can put more SMGs if you wanted to into the Moroccans. That's really the key difference there.
Yeah, it's a shame actually because they've already got the tough fighter. If it was the other way around, where you're not already paying for the tough fighter, then I might use that option.
Next one is your Brigade de Choc section or Brigade de Choc section. This is a bit of a catch-all because effectively you can use it to represent late war Free French commandos, airborne, Brigade de Choc, or Foreign Legion units. These are a 5-man veteran team, 70 points, so 14 points each. So basic veteran, they are stubborn. You can add up to 5 SMGs. You can add a BAR or a light machine gun, and you can give them anti-tank grenades. So if you want some stubborn vets armed to the teeth with SMGs, this is the squad to look at.
Yeah, if you're doing your whole platoon with these, you could have a few squads with SMGs and a couple of squads with a BAR. And the squads with a BAR could be sort of your backfield objective holders, because being stubborn veterans with a 30-inch range shot, it's a nice backfield objective holder, that squad.
The next one is the ski section. These are veteran mountain troops, so that's why they're 14 points. They have skis as well. You can add up to 4 SMGs and so on. It's just another little bit of flavoursome unit.
Nice.
The one I quite like is your Free French SAS infantry section, but they are pricey. So for 72 points, you're getting 4 men with rifles and pistols. You can add up to 4 additional men for 18 points each. You can replace the rifle with the SMG for 2 points. And the reason why it's 2, not 3, is they've got pistols. So they've got tough fighter rule already. You can add up to 2 LMGs. If you really want to go for it, you can make those LMGs Vickers K LMGs. And that adds an additional dice per. So that makes them 5 dice rather than 4. And you can also give them anti-tank grenades. Now, the reason why they're so expensive is they are fanatic, plus they get behind enemy lines, and you're paying for the pistols. So you can waste a lot of points here, but if you want a hard as nails 4 or 5 man squad who are tough fighters, fanatics, outflanking if you really wanted to with behind enemy lines, something to look at and consider.
Basically, they're 5 points more than a normal veteran. Of those 5 points, 1 was for the pistol, 1 was for behind enemy lines, that's 2 points, and then 3 points for the fanatic. So actually, the points do add up, but you're right, it's pricey. If you took the 2 LMGs, and it's a 4-man team, including the NCO, can the NCO carry the LMG?
This is a good question, and it's similar to the whole, can an NCO become an assistant, for example, or can he have a Panzerfaust when he's shot in other units, isn't it? It's that principle you're getting at? Yeah.
I think he probably can, to be honest. Because he is a man, and it says up to 2 men. It's just interesting. It's basically because usually it says the NCO can have X and the men can have Y. And so because they split it up, we presume that unless it says the NCO can have something, he can't have it. Here, because there are only 4 men, the NCO is going to have to either be the LMG gunner or the loader, or one of your LMGs doesn't have a loader, which when you're paying 20 points, that would be
doubly hampering.
Not particularly fair. Yeah, exactly. I mean, are you going to pay 5 points for the extra shot?
Yeah, you're not, are you?
No. Although, actually, having said that, 10 shots out of a team isn't bad. I mean, you're only 122 points deep on those 10 shots.
Bargain.
Absolute bargain. I mean, it's 8 points cheaper than a Stewart, I think. So, how could you go wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the next squad, Phil?
So the next squad is your Prévôt Militaire squad. These can be taken in your generic platoon, providing a French army includes inexperienced or regular infantry as an option.
Mm-hmm.
They're 20 points for 4 men, inexperienced. They're armed with pistols, and they also have the get back in the fight rule. What this means then is that if any French unit fails an attempt to rally, it can immediately roll a second attempt if within 6 inches of a Prévôt Militaire squad. So if you're going to take the FFI squads, for example, you might think about taking this as well.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm more thinking just as a very cheap squad.
Well, you would, yes, because you like your little cheap order dice, yeah.
I mean, it's like a mule, but slightly better.
It's like a mule with pistols, yeah.
Yeah.
Your final one is your French intelligence squad. This is a 4-man team, 45 points in experience, 63 points regular, 81 points vet. Your officer is armed as depicted. The men have rifles, and it gives you the ability to, once per turn, try and draw that first order dice out of the bag. Sorry, once per game, try and draw that first order dice out of the bag.
It's a good include, as we've said previously in other episodes. Just like it's one that you could certainly build a battle plan around, isn't it?
Yeah. Your support weapons, you've got your medium machine gun, you've got your bazooka team, as is in the United States book. You've got your sniper team, you've got your flamethrower team, you've got your light mortar team, your medium mortar team. So all of that is basically as is from the US book. The sniper's slightly different. It's armed slightly differently, and it costs 2 points more than the US version does.
Interesting.
Artillery-wise, you've got light, medium, and heavy artillery as per the Armies of US book. You've got your 40mm Bofors and your 57mm anti-tank gun. Vehicles for tanks, quite limited. So you've got your M3A3 Stuart light tank. You've got your M5 and your M5A1 Stuart light tank. You've got your M4A1, A2, A3, A4 Sherman 75mm. And you've got your M4A1, A2, A3 Sherman 76mm.
The A2 is famously half the size of the A1, isn't it? And then the A3 is half the size of the A2.
That's how it works, yeah.
And then the A4 is half the size again, yeah.
Yeah, we'll just keep folding it in on itself.
Yeah.
You can take your M10 tank destroyer. You can take an M8 Scots. You can take an M7 Priest. Armoured cars, you can take the Greyhound, M8 Greyhound. You can also take the Free French SAS Jeep, which is the same as the British SAS Jeep.
That's a good Jeep, isn't it? Isn't that the one that's got just machine guns piled on machine guns?
Yeah, bristling with machine guns. Yeah, absolutely. And then your transport is your M3 White Scout car, your Jeep, your Dodge 3/4 truck, your 1.5 ton truck, your 2.5 ton truck, your favourite, the M4, M5 artillery tractor.
Classic.
The M5 half track, and my favourite, the mule.
Yeah, a lot of choice there. It does feel rather American, the whole list.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people discount late war Free French because, it's basically like the Americans, but not as good. And I disagree because you've got a lot more options in your infantry choices than you do in kind of late war US Army builds, for example. Yes, your support weapons and your armored vehicles and your transport are exactly the same as your US options. Plus, you've got the British SAS Jeep. But that's because at that time of the war, the French army were supplied by the US Army. Where it's different is the fact you can take your inexperienced FFI squads and get an extra one if you want. You can take your hard as nails, fanatic, tough fighting, outflanking French SAS. You can take your Senegalese, you can take your North Africans, you can take your Foreign Legion. You've also got some really good modelling opportunities as well. So, yeah, I wouldn't discount them as saying they're not a very good version of the US because I think they've got more options available to them with regards to infantry choices.
I'll tell you what we didn't discuss when we talked about the infantry. The fact that these tough fighting, mountain going, run through rough ground infantrymen can also be stubborn.
Yes.
And that we kind of discounted that as we've gone through. And actually that's a huge perk to be able to do that to any squad you want as long as it's not inexperienced.
Yeah. So where I think the late war Free French and also the mid-war Western Desert Free French, it's the additional rules. So the fact that with the late war you can add stubborn if they're regular or vet, and the fact that the mid-war they re-roll failed morale checks does make a big difference.
Yeah, I think of the two, I'm going to go Western Desert. It just feels more flavoursome, and I like that re-roll morale checks rule. It's really good.
And if the way I've built mine for the Welsh Open is I've got 2 full-strength Senegalese squads. So they can re-roll failed order checks whilst they remain full strength, and they can re-roll failed morale checks as well. So and then you've also got your stubborn Foreign Legion. If they fail a morale check, they can re-roll it again.
Cool. Yeah, quite good, the Free French then, overall, I'd say. Lots of options and they don't feel underpowered.
No. I'm not aware of anybody, winning a major tournament with a Free French list. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I think for certain events, either like restricted dice events or single platoon or something like the Welsh Open where it's theatre selectors and Mark's allowed the Western Desert one this year, I think they can do all right. And they're just not, they're different, they're flavoursome. You don't see them very often. Nice modelling opportunities as well.
Brilliant. Anything else to say on the Free French?
No, c'est fini.
C'est fini.
Well, that's probably enough French for one evening. So thanks everyone who's been listening, commenting. It's fantastic to hear from our listeners, both directly and also on the Facebook page. Please continue to like, share and subscribe. If you've liked what you've heard tonight and you fancy playing the French, it would be brilliant to see some French armies at the English Open. So if you're interested in that 2-day event coming up in October, if you go over to our website, you'll be able to see a link there to tickets for that.
Thank you for listening. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Le vol noir des corbeaux sur nos plaines. Amis, entends-tu le chant lourd du pays qu'on enchaîne? Oh, et partisans, ouvriers et paysans, à vos armes. Ce soir, l'ennemi connaîtra le prix du sang et des larmes. De la mine, descendez des collines, camarades. Sortez de la paille, les fusils, la mitraille, les grenades. Oh, et les tueurs, à la balle ou au couteau, tuez vite. Oh, et ça saboteur, attention à ton fardeau, dynamite. C'est nous qui brisons les barreaux des prisons pour nos frères. La haine à nos trousses et la faim qui nous pousse la misère. Il y a des pays où les gens courent du lit font des rêves. Ici, nous vois-tu, nous on marche et nous on tue, nous on crève. Ici, chacun sait ce qu'il veut, ce qu'il fait quand il passe. Ami, si tu tombes, un ami sort de l'ombre à ta place. Demain, du sang noir séchera au grand soleil sur les routes. Sifflez, compagnons, dans la nuit, la liberté vous écoute.